started. Looks like we got a whole bunch of people with us today. So everybody, you guys probably know me already. My name is Max Chera with Express Capital Financing. And tonight we have a very special guest, a brand new affiliate of Express Capital Financing, John Sludge with Think Like an Appraiser. I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit more, but I just want to go in first a little bit as to why I thought this was really such a big part of why this is such a big value to investors, especially in our market. We're in a time right now where we're just talking about it. Prices are going up, prices are going down, and we're making these educated decisions on, or not educated, but more calculated decisions on what we're going to take on as far as our next project. Do I want to take, how much am I going to sell it for? What am I going to buy it for? How much does it cost for renovations? But then you also know that, right? Like, for example, right now, we were just talking about how in Texas, a lot of people are moving contingencies, especially the appraisal contingency, because they know it won't appraise because they're giving 100,000 over the ask or whatever it might be. And that's important to understand, right? We have to think like an appraiser and we have to think like an investor. So that this way we know that all of our bases are covered. And so without any further ado, I'd love to introduce John. John, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Max, thanks for inviting me to join you guys, and thanks for letting me share my insights into real estate investing. I am a retired appraiser, appraised for 15 years, and was currently an investor as well. We've been investing for about 10 years. So, first, I'd like to ask a couple of questions, and I know you can't answer my questions, but why do we invest in real estate? And the answer is we're here to make money. I mean, that's why we do it. And so to make money, we have to maximize the value of our value add projects. So when we're doing a renovation, we have to maximize that value. And so who determines the value is the appraiser. So we've got to make sure that we can look at our deals through the eyes of an appraiser. And that's why we're called Think Like an Appraiser, because we're the only people that teach this, and we teach how to analyze your deals and look at it through the eyes of an appraiser. And because that's definitely the way to maximize the value and to determine what your scope of work is. So one of the tools that an appraiser uses that I want to share with you is the quality rating system. And it's not something that's most people have even heard about, but when an appraiser is completing an appraisal, they utilize the quality rating system, and they do this to rate your project, the scope of work, to look at the comparable sales, and to rate those to determine what sales your project will be compared to. Because as an investor doing a value add project, the appraiser is going to have to come in and do an as-is appraisal. So they're going to determine the value of that property today, but they also have to have your scope of work so that they can determine the after repaired value, or the ARV. And so they're utilizing this quality rating system to determine that. What are the comparable sales? How do they compare? And what value can we assign to this house? So while what we recommend is that you as an investor utilize this quality rating system to determine what comparable sales you're going to use, because your goal is to compete on the high end of the market, because you want to compete up here. And to do that, you have to be comparable to those sales. So you need to use the quality rating system to determine what your scope of work is. And that really is the first step. I know a lot of people look at it and they go, okay, I got to determine what my ARV is going to be. But you can't do that until you determine what your scope of work is. So the key, once you've determined that scope of work to compete, is to, one, you got to do quality work. Those finishes have to be right on. You got to complete your renovations to compete at that high level. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to overbuild. Don't do renovations that the market doesn't require. And that's one of the things I see a lot is people will go in and say, wow, this granite is level 4 and it's great. But if the comparable sales only have level 1 or level 2 granite, you're spending extra money that you're not going to get out on the back end. Because our goal as investors is we want to put as much profit in our pocket. So we need to maximize the value while we minimize our costs, but do the costs that you need to compete. when we work with investors all over the country, and some of the things we see with the new investors is they're fearful. They worry about the cost of completing a renovation and buying an investment property. It's expensive. I mean, you're investing a lot of money in capital of your own money, as well as the financing that you'll require to complete your project. So have you ever worried about the cost and the financial aspects of a project? The second one is overwhelmed. There's so many details that you have to complete, from the planning to the execution to getting the house sold. And it can be overwhelming because you have to get all these details done. And what about you investors that have done a few projects? Excuse me. Do you ever feel like you have a lack of confidence about analyzing the deal, determining what your ARV is and what your scope of work is? Those are all of those items you can cure, and it's all based on planning and due diligence. You know, I've appraised for over 15 years, and I've got countless stories that I could tell, and most of them, you know, the good stories, the deal goes through, but most of the horror stories that I know all came from a lack of planning. And I'm going to share a story with you because it's just stood out to me over the years. And it's a good point of how important planning and due diligence is during the process. So I had it was a private investor that called me one day. It wasn't a lender. He was an investor, and he called and said, I need you to do an appraisal for me. I've got an investor who's run out of cash, and he wants me to partner with him to finish the deal. But I want to know what the as-is value is and what the ARV is the project is before I, before I determine whether I'm going to help him finish up. So I said, okay, can you give me a little background on the investor and the deal he's got working? And he said, yeah. He said, it's a first-time investor. He got an inheritance, so he had some cash and always wanted to do a flip. So he took his cash, went and bought a house, started a renovation, and ran out of cash, and he's looking for a partner to finish up. I said, okay, no problem. I can go over there. I get this done. We'll get my site visit done, and then we'll talk. So I go up to the house, and I get to the door, and the owner comes out, and he hands me a sheet of paper that he had printed off and said, was a list of sales in the area. And he said, here, I subscribe to this service. It costs about $100 a month, and I can get access to sales. And I said, oh, that's great. I don't know the service, that you can do a lot of that. It takes a little more work, but you can get all that information off the internet yourself. You don't have to pay for that. And he said, no, okay. But so he handed me the list, and I said, okay, great. I said, before I do my site visit, I need to know your scope of work. What's your plan? I need to have all the details of that. He said, well, I don't have that. I said, you don't have a scope of work? And he said, well, no, I'm working on that. He said, as you can see from these sales, I could sell this house for $250,000 if I add a bedroom. And so that was his whole focus, was he had to make sure he had this extra bedroom. And so I'm trying to decide whether I'm going to reconfigure the house or am I going to do an addition? And I said, okay. Well, at that point, I couldn't do an after repaired value because I don't know what the scope of work is. Because as an appraiser, to complete an ARV appraisal, you have to look at the process and look at the home as it is, and then look at what they're going to do and look for comparable sales that'll match the finished product. So they have to let me envision what that house is going to be afterwards. So I said, okay, well, I'm here. Let's go ahead and complete the site visit. And that way I can at least determine the as-is value of the home. So he says, fine. And he opens the door, and I walk in, and it was, oh my God, the house was a wreck. It was a pier and beam house, had beautiful wood floors in it. Well, no, they were nice quality wood floors. There were huge holes cut out of the inside out of the floors, and there was dirt that had been excavated from underneath the house in the rooms. And so I'm standing there. I know that the look on my face was shock. And the guy said, yeah, I found out that we have a lot of foundation issues we have to repair that we have to take care of. And so my contractor cut all these holes and they began the repairs. So my thought is, and what I wanted you to understand is, this guy has run out of cash. He's got holes in the floor because he has to redo all the foundation, and he doesn't have a plan. And so he's dealing with all these emotions right now. And so, that story that still bothers me today. I don't know whatever happened. I don't know if he figured it out and got it to work, but I got back to the office and I called my client and I said, I can't complete an as is because the house is uninhabitable, and I can't complete an ARV because we don't have a plan. We don't have a scope of work. And so I said, call me if you want me to, if things change and you want me to do it. And I never heard back from him. So I don't know how that ended up, but one of the topics I wanted to talk about tonight, and this kind of leads into it, is I find 5 of the most common mistakes. There's tons of mistakes that we make as investors, and we all learn, and I'll share one of mine with you later. But had he done his due diligence and made a plan, he could have better navigated. He can't control the fact that he didn't know there was foundation work that needed to be done, but you can better navigate if you have a plan. So the first mistake, and unfortunately the 5 that I have, he hit them all, but so that it works out. But he focused on the deal, but never made a plan. So all of his focus was, I got to find a house. I have this cash. I can sell it for $250,000. And that was it. That was his plan. So he found the deal, but he failed to make a plan. The next thing that he did, and is a common mistake, is some investors that are new look at comparable sales without really knowing what to look for. They don't analyze the comparable sales as the appraiser will. So this guy was looking at the sales and he determined he had to add a bedroom. That was what he had determined he needed to do. The third thing is determining your ARV before you determine your scope of work. So he knew he wanted to sell it for $250,000, but he had no idea what his scope of work is. You can't get to the ARV until you know what your scope of work is. So what we look at is, we talked about using the quality rating system to determine your scope of work, because what the appraiser will do is he'll analyze these sales and he's going to do it in a manner that's very detailed. I talk to real estate agents and some investors that we work with, and they tell me, well, in this neighborhood, a renovated home sells for blank dollars per square foot, and a non-renovated home sells for this amount per square foot. And you can't look at it in generalities like that. You have to take a detailed look and look at each area of the house to determine what renovations need to be completed. And that's the great part about looking at it through the eyes of the appraisers. You can take this quality rating system and know, in the bathroom, I have to complete new countertops, new cabinets, the tub is fine, maybe a tile surround. Where in the master, let's go into the second bathrooms, and the cabinets can just be painted because that's what everybody else has done. They're using granite countertops. So you can look room by room and pick specific items that you have to complete. And that's the key. Be specific, know exactly what you have to do, cost it out, and then you can determine an ARV. And then you can look at your spread and say, yes, this is a profitable deal. And in your budget, always have contingencies. Very rarely have I gone into a value add deal and not needed to fix something I didn't plan. So yeah.
Just to add in on that, I try to recommend it at all times for everybody to always add a contingency or miscellaneous field to the scope of work, because even as a lender as well, right? Let's talk about how that works. If we're going to change the scope of work, I mean, John, you tell me what happens if I change the scope of work.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you change the scope of work, let's say, so an appraiser, so really there's 3 appraisals that are done. The as-is value when you buy the property, and the ARV that's done before work starts to get your financing for your loan. But when you sell it or refinance it, if you're going to do a long-term hold, there's a third appraisals done. And so if your ARV comes in for your initial loan and you change your scope of work, the appraisal at the sale time or at the refinance might not be the same as the appraisal done on the front end of the work. Right. And so you can't cut corners during the process.
And then as the lender, what's going to happen is they're going to say, well, we can't change this because that's what brought value, let's just say, to your ARV and how we, reviewed the deal. So by adding in a miscellaneous field, that allows you to have access to capital should a surprise come up or something happen that you have to change something to allow you to do more work to the property. So that's actually super, super important. I even, sometimes even I'll overestimate rather than underestimate or actual, just to make sure that I always have enough capital for it.
I think it's critical, and I don't know that everybody does that. And it's, they're trying to make the deal work within the parameters. And what you need to understand is after you make that, that determination, then you decide whether it's the right deal or not. But you have to have all that information before you buy the house, because if it doesn't work, it's not the right deal and you need to move on. So I know people talk all the time about analysis paralysis. Well, that's not it. If you make a decision to not move forward, that's a decision. Then you can go look at the next property and do your due diligence on that and do your analysis on that. So I think it's a great point. Then the final, failing to base your renovation plan on comparable sales. We just talked about that. You gotta base your renovations on the comparable sales, because the scope of work is what's going to determine your ARV, which by following it, it will determine, what your sales price can be at the end of the project. And finally, basing decisions on emotions. You're going to run into days that your emotions are going to go through the roof. There's going to be a problem you didn't expect. You're at the end of the job. The inspector comes in and he says, no, it's not done. You got to do this, this, and this. And that's very emotional. But if you do the steps that we talked about and you make your plan and it's detailed and everything is costed out and you have contingencies, then when those things come up, then you can step back and you can look at your plan and you can say, okay, this is going to cost me an extra $5,000. What do I do about that? Well, you have a contingency over here. Hopefully you've put enough in there. But the other piece is look at your scope of work. Don't cut corners. Don't change your scope of work. But can you, let's see, so you not only have all the costs. So let's say you can find a product that is equal in the scope of work, but might be easier to install. Then that could save some time and some dollars there. You can look at those things. But the other thing is, can you get your job completed quicker than you had planned? And then you save on your carry costs. And can you use some of that to defer from the contingency or the problem that you had? And so if you look at it that way, you can never completely take the emotion out. But if you base your decisions on the emotion, you're going to cut corners and you're going to run into a problem when it comes time to finish up the deal. So, those are the main, I call them my 5 common mistakes that we make as investors. The final thing I want to talk about tonight, and Max and I talked about this, is asking questions. That's one of the hardest things to do as an investor, and it is one of the most critical pieces, especially when you're interviewing a contractor or trades, depending on if you contract it yourself or if you hire a contractor, is knowing what questions to ask. But even more, it's knowing how to ask the question. So one of the things we've done, and if you go to our website at thinklikeanappraiser.com,
I'll put it in the chat for everybody.
We've got a list of 75 due diligence questions to ask. So we've gone through, and these are questions for the lender, for your plumber, for your contractor, the title company, your real estate agent, 75 questions that we just went through and said, what are the questions we ask every time? so that we know we have our plan and we can move forward. And we came up with 75 of them. So it's just a list. It's a free download. So if you go to our website and download that, if you do it, you'll not only get that list for free, but it'll also give you a coupon for 50% off your first month if you join our Think Like an Appraiser platform, our education platform. And so what we want to do is, when you're asking questions of, let's just talk about the contractor. So you want to ask open-ended questions. You want to ask them, for example, how would you do this? Tell me the process that you would do. How much, what period of time will this take? And, explain to me what times your guys work. Ask these questions to where they actually have to tell you something. Don't ask yes or no questions, because they're just, those are easy to answer and you don't get the information that you need. So always ask open-ended questions. Here, I'll tell you a story. I told you I was going to share one of my mistakes. One of our first flips, and I was still appraising at the time, and we were doing our first flip, and it was a great 1940s house. Had great white oak floors that needed some repairs done, and but then we had to sand and refinish it. I had a carpenter that worked with me for about 4 years before that, and impeccable work, eye for detail. Anything he could do, I wanted him to do it on my job. And so we got to the end, had to get these floors done, and I said, hey, can you stain wood floors? Sand and stain wood floors? Yeah, I can. So what did I do? I asked him if he could do it. I told you not to do that, but that's exactly what I did. So he said, I need about 4 days and you can't walk in here while it's being done. I said, okay, fine. So we show up. Yeah, no, he can't do it. He can, but the quality of these wood floors and the level of the finish that was necessary to compete, he couldn't do. It wasn't in his skill level. And he needed the work, and I was willing to offer. And that was a mistake, because then I had to hire another company, and I asked them different questions when they came in to come back and redo my wood floors. And fortunately, I had a contingency fund that paid for that. But, we all pay stupid tax at some point, and I made that payment that day. It cost me. So don't ask questions with a yes or no answer. Ask them how they will do it, what their process is. And even if you don't know how to do something, they'll explain it to you, and then you can go Google it or hit YouTube and find out what the correct way to do something is. But what you really want to do is, are they confident in enough in what they're doing to answer that question? Another example, and I asked the right questions, is we were building a deck on a house, and a large deck, and the yard sloped side to side. So it would have been at zero level at one side, and then it was about 3 feet tall on the other side. And so I asked him, I said, so how will you build this on the slope? And I had 3 different people come in, and they all had different answers to it. And then I asked them, what materials would you use? It's going to be at ground level over here and touching the ground and then above. And so they all did. And I was able to take that information and determine this person has the best knowledge. They know the materials to use, and they're very competent in the way they answer their questions. So it's really as much what they say, but it's also how they say it and their confidence level when they're explaining that to you. So one of the things is that once you've determined who you're going to move forward with, then you got to ask questions about, how long is this job going to take? What days of the week do you work? How much will it cost? And I recommend that any bids you get the labor and the material separated out, because one, you want to make sure it's just best to know that information separately for your bidding, for your budgeting purposes. But also you need to ensure that they're utilizing quality materials that'll meet the quality ratings that you've already determined. A lot of times I like to purchase the materials because I want to ensure that what's going into that house meets what I expect. And because I don't want to show up and say, oh, the guy will do the bathroom for $5,000, and you come in and it's, the cheap vanity, and the tile's not the level you wanted. And so always get that separated out and make sure they understand what it is from a material standpoint that you require. And then the final thing you need to ask them is, or to agree upon, is a payment schedule. A lot of contractors want you to pay on Friday. They pay their guys on Friday. They want you to write them a check on Friday. I don't do it that way. I do it like the lender does. They meet a certain amount of work being done. I write them a check. It could be day after tomorrow. It could be 2 weeks from now. When they finish these 3 projects or whatever we determine, I pay you this amount of money. Just like when you make your draw on your loan, you have to finish a certain amount of work before you get your draw. And so that's how I work it when I pay my contractors, because I don't want to pay them just because it's Friday. I want to pay them for what they've completed. And so once you've agreed upon all that, get it in writing, everybody signs it. And that way, if there's a conflict down the road, you open up the agreement and say, here's what we all agreed upon, and this is what my expectation is. Or you realize, oh, I made a mistake. Okay, you're right. Whatever it is, it's there in writing and you've agreed upon it. Everybody signed it, and that's the expectation moving forward. So, you know, my final thought is to make sure you ask enough questions, have those conversations, and get it in writing. So, you know, I appreciate the time I've had to talk about thinking like an appraiser, and you know, I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has this evening.
So we got one question in. I want everyone to please collect your thoughts. Let us know what questions you have. Put it in the Q&A box. Before we get to the questions, though, John, I would love to just go in a little bit into some details as to the Think Like an Appraiser program and how it works. So if I wanted to be a part of Think Like an Appraiser, what would it do for me, and how would I get to it?
All right, so we're at thinklikeanappraiser.com, and we've got a couple of different options. All of our coursework is video based. So we break up all these topics in about 30-minute videos. So some of the really detailed topics we've got broken up into a couple of different sections, but it's all video based. So you can actually, we have an app that you can download and you can listen to it in your car as you're driving along. But so we have the level, and then also in there, you have access to all of our processes. So when we're talking about the quality ratings, we have a list of all the quality ratings and pictures of examples of different qualities. We also teach you how to estimate as is and after repaired value. And we have spreadsheets that walk you through the process and does calculations for you. So all of that is available in our resource library. So you can become a member for just the resource library, and it's $39 a month. The second level is to become a member of the Think Like an Appraiser community. So you have access in there to all of the resources that I spoke about, but then you also have access to our live events. We do a monthly Q&A where we'll get on a Zoom call like this and I'll answer questions for an hour. We also do a workshop each month to where if one of the members has a deal they want to look at, you know, we can get on there and analyze that deal. I can help them ask questions about it. And then also while you're in a course or in the forum, you can ask questions. So if you have, let's say you're analyzing the quality of a deal, and you can post some pictures in the forum and say, you know, what quality rating would you think this is? Or I had these comparable sales. How do I do this? I really don't understand. And we can answer your questions. So for $79 a month, you have access in the forum and to our live events, to where you actually get to have access and ask questions. So we give you 2 different levels and then we're there. My wife, like I said, I was a 15-year appraiser. My wife was a classroom teacher for 20 years, and we've been investing together for the past 10. So we take all of that experience and compile it together to build this platform. And we also have a podcast that we do called Think Like an Appraiser, cautionary tales in real estate. We have guests come on. About every other one, Kaylin and I will do it by ourselves, but I have guests come on that are either investors or lenders, or had a home inspector a couple of weeks ago and just tell of something that blew up, because a lot of what you hear out there is all the shiny stuff, oh God, you can make so much money, and it's just, it's so easy. And yeah, this is a great business, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of planning, and a lot of bad things happen. And so we tell those stories. But what we do is we tell those stories, and then we tell you how they survived, or what they did the next time to avoid that situation. So it's an interesting, and it's called Think Like an Appraiser, Cautionary Tales in Real Estate. And it's on all the podcast platforms.
Beautiful. Well, guys, everyone, if you want to visit thinklikeanappraiser.com, I put the link in the chat box for you. I'm also going to put in, they're also an affiliate partners of ours, like I mentioned. So I'll put that page in there as well, where you could access it directly from our website as well. It looks like we had some questions come in, so let's get to them. So Pat wants to know, when we were talking about the contingencies, what is the recommended amount that you would set aside? Is it 20%, or is there something else that you base it off of?
That's a great question. And there really isn't a standard. I think probably the most common is 20%, because in the important part of what we do is, by having a very detailed renovation plan, you're trying to avoid utilizing the contingency and having a budget built on as many problems, or anything that you can, that needs to be taken care of. But I think if you have a 20% contingency budget, that should be, in most cases, would be, I think would cover most contingencies you run across. What is your thought on that, Max?
I usually honestly stick to like about a 10 or 15%.
Okay.
I mean, obviously the more contingency that your deal allows you to have, the better off you are, right?
Yeah. But you got to make sure it has to fit in within the parameters as well. I mean, it has to fit the lending guidelines as well.
Exactly. So if I see that I have a lot of room on a deal, I might add a little bit more, because thinking about it from the lending side, most lenders nowadays, including Express Capital Financing, is going to lend you based off of what's called as dispersed, which means that I only pay interest on funds that I've drawn. So right. If day one, I'm only paying interest on the purchase price because I didn't draw any rehab money yet. So what that means is, if I paid 2% of that budget as an insurance policy to originate the loan, but I'm not paying interest on it, I'll pay almost at least 2% of 10% of my budget to make sure that I know I have extra money and capital available to myself.
Right. No, that makes sense.
So that's how I kind of see that.
Perfect.
So now Daryl would like to know, would you appraise a property in the same manner for a flip as you would if you would wholesale the property?
So any appraisal is, so no, that you wouldn't, because a wholesale it's a sale just based on the it's based on the sale of the property. So if the appraisal for that would just be based on the as is value, so it would be a single value based, in my opinion, based on the current condition of the home, where a flip would require, and I'll ask Max to see what their requirements are. And it really is lender, whatever the lender requires. But most homes that are being appraised for a flip would require the as-is value to determine what the value is compared to the purchase price. But then there's an after repair value that we talked about. And so that is required to determine what, based on your scope of work, what the home will be worth at the end of the project. And typically for a flip, both of those values are required.
Correct. So as the lender side, yes, we do require both the as is and the ARV. We even sometimes will add in the rental comps because that helps if the deal isn't so profitable. Let's say, at least you have the exit strategy of refinancing it. So it's always best to know those numbers. I mean, you probably know what it costs for those, about $100 to get a rental comp.
Yeah, it's about exactly. It's not much more. And that's a great point, because one of the things that Kaylin and I do on all of our investment properties is we look at multiple exit strategies. This property might be a flip when we go in, but the market might change. And we want to know up front, what if this has to become a rental property? Can we cash flow it? So, or we go into a rental property and something might change in the market, and, you know, the prices are skyrocketing for a sale, and it might make more sense to flip at that point. So those are things that we actually look at up front and try to have multiple exit strategies on all of our deals. And we have our primary strategy, but then we want to know, you know, what other options do we have out there, so that if we have an issue, we're not, like I said, dealing with emotions. We already have a plan in place, a plan B. So
100%. Plan B's. I was told by one of my clients, he was a Jewish client. So he said, one who prepares for the Sabbath eats on the Sabbath.
There you go.
Just plan and be ready. And as long as you plan for it, everything will work out one way or another, especially if you have a couple of options. So now Mariah wants to know if you have any best practices on finding contractors.
You know, that is probably one of the most difficult things to do. And it's the best way to find them is word of mouth. What I can tell you is and I'm speaking in generalities here, the contractor that's available to start work tomorrow, it's just like the appraiser who's available to go and do the appraisal tomorrow, is probably not the most experienced or the highest quality. So you definitely want to plan ahead, because, and with the market the way it is, they're busy. I mean, most of them have more work than they can do. And so you need to plan that. Each market's different, but I talk to people that we self-contract, so we do it a little bit differently, but so I'm out looking for trades and different people. But it's, if you've worked with people or you know people in the business, ask them who they like working for. Let's say you're looking for a contractor, but you know a carpenter or you know a plumber. Who do they like working for? Because you got to have a contractor who has good relationships with their trades. And so that's word of mouth is definitely the best.
For sure. Here's a good one. So Carlos wants to know, what if I figure out when he's 50% into his project that there's something that he could do to edit the project with a little cost, but to bring the value up? Is that something that you would change mid-project, or what views do you have?
Well, I mean, if you come across something that makes sense, that will increase the value, and, you know, then by all means, if the cost of it makes sense and the amount of the value that it'll increase, then sure. And you can afford it. You have the capital either out of pocket or left in your contingency, then sure, there's no problem with that, because you make your plan at the point that you start the project. And the main thing, and like Max mentioned earlier, you don't want to remove anything from your scope of work. You don't want to go backwards, because then you're going to reduce your value and it's going to bite you on the back end. But if it makes sense and the comparable sales support those changes and you can add additional value all the time, if you can do it and you can add more value, because all that's going to do is put more cash in your pocket at the end of the day. So yeah, and because the market's always fluid. I mean, if you've had sales happen since you started the project, the scope of work might be able to be changed. And if you can make more cash than it costs you to do it, and you can afford it, then by all means, go for it.
Absolutely, guys. Just always keep in mind, though, weigh out your cost versus your return on that, right? Sometimes
that's the key.
Sometimes it might cost you $100 to add $20 of value or $30 of value. Might not be the best move.
Right. Well, it's like people ask all the time, you know, oh, so should I build a pool? Well, if you like to swim, build a pool. You know, don't build a pool to add value to your home, because you won't add the value that it's going to cost you to put that in. So, you know, that's more for your personal home, but I would never have an investor add a pool unless it's a certain neighborhood that had to have that to compete. But very rarely will you get the value out. And so I think that's a great point. Don't spend more than you can get out of it. And even if it's a push, it's not worth doing, because it's going to add to your timeline, your carry costs. You might have to carry it a little bit longer. So
True too.
If the value add is substantially more than the cost overall, and it doesn't slow down your project, then it makes sense.
Absolutely. So here's a great question. What is the difference between a BPO and a formal appraisal?
Okay. The BPO is something that is put together by your realtor. So they look at comparable sales, and they have ideas of what different things affect the value. What an appraisal, and so it's very different than an appraisal. It's their opinion of what a home could sell for. It's not an opinion of value. So there's the difference. The BPO is an opinion of what a home possibly could sell for, where a full appraisal is actually determining what the market value is of a specific home. The appraiser will go in, and they've done a full site visit of your home. They've measured the home to confirm the size of the home. Because we're in a price per square foot business, you should always, and this is another point that I'd like to make for your investors, I'll come back to it. Then they go through and they look at the comparable sales, and they're looking at every room in that house, like we talked about. They're taking a quality rating and determining what the quality of each room in that house is compared to your house. And then they're going to make adjustments on every line. They're going to make adjustments for size. They're going to make adjustments for quality. They're going to make adjustments for room counts, for garages, pools, guest houses, any amenity you have. They're actually adjusting to make it equal. So if you have something that another house doesn't, then you're going to get some money added to yours, and back and forth. So it is a more detailed report, and it is an estimation of value, not an estimation of a list price or a sales price, if that makes sense. Let me, well, sorry, I lost my thought, but when I get back, it'll come back to me, and I'll come back around.
I think it was on the price per square foot.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna have to think about it. I got so detailed into my answer, it just slipped my mind. But oh no, here it is. Yeah, so we're in a price per square foot business, and if you don't know for a fact the size of the home, how can you really determine any of your values or a list price? So the lender hires an appraiser to do an appraisal, and the first thing the appraiser does is measure that home to determine the size of the home. Well, if you've done a project and if you had an appraisal done and you know the size and you didn't do any additions, then that's great. But if you have made any changes, or it was a cash deal and you didn't have an appraisal done, hire either a home measurement specialist or an appraiser to come out and measure that home for you, so that you know exactly what it is you're dealing with. Because I can tell you more appraisals don't make value because there's a home size variance than anything else. So thanks for reminding me what it was I wanted to answer, but it's just a point that I run across all the time.
That's an amazing point. And especially also when sometimes I see that people account for one square footage. Well, you guys don't have basements out there in San Antonio, but here we do.
Right.
And not always can you count it as living square footage.
Yeah, in Texas, so there's the ANSI measurement standards, which are what appraisers use to measure a home. So there's a difference between gross living area, which is the above grade living, finished, air conditioned, heated living space. So any home that has above grade levels, that is your gross living area. Now, if you have a basement and it's finished, it'll be given value, but it's not considered part of that main improvement. It would be, let's say you had a house that had a guest house in the backyard. It was separate. That below grade or the basement area would be considered something similar to that. It would still give you square footage and it would still give you value, but depending on the finish out work, whether the value is equal to is not always the same. So knowing the differences so that you can plan for that, that's a great point, because you're right. We don't deal with a lot of basements, but most of the country does. So
Yep. Absolutely. And we'll go for one last question of the night. So Yanira wants to know, so based on Daryl's question, which was about he was asking about do you do the same appraisal for a wholesale as you would a fix and flip? So Yanira wants to know, based on that question, would you do an appraisal before and after the property is renovated, or
okay, yeah, I got that. I think I did, and if not, then I'll be happy to do a clarification. So the lender will hire an appraiser prior to closing the purchase that will include the as-is value to get their ratios on the purchase and the after repaired value for the renovation funds to ensure that it meets the lender's parameters. So that's completed, two different values that it's completed prior to closing the purchase of the home. So that lender won't require another appraisal at the end, but if it's a flip, the buyer's lender will require an appraisal at the end. If it's going to be a value add buy and hold, then your lender for your long-term financing for the rental property will require another appraisal for the refinance. So yes, there is another appraisal done, but it's not part of that original. I hope I answered it all right. So it's not part of that original. Your lender for the front end of the loan won't require an appraisal at the end. It's just based on when you sell the home, or if you're trying to refinance it, then another appraisal will be ordered by that lender who's doing that financing.
Absolutely. And honestly, the latter is something that I deal with all the time. But the first one was actually a little bit of an eye opener to really think of it that way. Like, hey, we got to also get the buyer's appraisal to match up with what we're selling.
Yeah, no, it does, because if that blows up, then, that changes the whole deal.
For sure. For sure. Well, John, I appreciate your time and being here with us tonight. It was extremely informative. Looks like we had a lot of questions. A lot of it got answered. Guys, again, please check out thinklikeanappraiser.com. John was real nice enough to sit out and here with us for an hour, give us a lot of his information, and hopefully you guys will see a lot of value in his program. And till next time, see you guys there.
Great. Thanks, Max.
All the best. And last thing, I'm sorry. We will be sending out a copy of the recording of this webinar. It'll also be posted on our website, and we will include all of John and Think Like an Appraiser's information so you can get signed up tomorrow.
Great. We look forward to seeing all of you there.
Perfect. Enjoy the rest of your night, guys.
Thanks.